Tony from Building here, the platform that helps property managers master their everyday operations, make their residents feel at home, and take on more doors. Today I'm talking with Deb Newell, CEO of Real-Time Consulting Services out of St. Paul, Minnesota, about how property managers can learn from the last 6 months of this pandemic, push forward, and continue to adapt for success. Great to be talking with you today, Deb.
Hi. So you had me worried when it said 6 months. I'm like, it's really been that long. I haven't really thought about it. That's actually a long time.
It is a long time, yeah, and that's why we really feel like now is the time for property managers to take a deep breath, to take a step back and realize how much they've changed, right? How much they've had to do. And so we'll definitely get into all of that stuff. And in addition to that, a couple of plugs for some building research and reports that can help property managers right out of the gate with this. Buildium recently did a report on property managers' outlook for growth, which surveyed about 1,700 different property managers on what they anticipate for growth during COVID. And we found some really interesting stuff. So we'll be bringing up some of those stats during this conversation, as well as a more recent report on leasing demand in 2020. So lots of good stuff there. Links to both of those reports are in the description, so you can take a look at them when you get a chance. Now, first question for you, Deb. Tell me a little bit about yourself and Real-Time Consulting Service.
I'm Deb Newell, as you had already introduced, and I have a consulting business called Real-Time Consulting Services out of Minneapolis. We focus on helping property management companies specifically with anything to do with people, process, and technology. That's kind of my quick 30-second elevator pitch on that. So a lot of times, you can be a brand new property management company. You could be established with years behind you, 30 years, maybe only 14 years, maybe only 7. Companies find that as they continue to grow or as things change, staff comes on, staff leaves, processes sometimes get neglected, or they never were established in the first place. Basically, I kind of come in and help look at the foundation of the business. I act as the interim CEO or COO, not CEO, sorry, right. COO, and kind of really help with the, who knows, maybe both, I don't know. And then I really help with the foundation and the operations of the company, because a lot of times that's what's kind of missing is somebody to really drive that implementation and drive the, that movement to get going and going forward.
Right, because it's much easier said than done, right? You have to organize processes.
Yeah, we all have great ideas, and people who own property management companies, they're the visionaries, they're the entrepreneurs, they're the guys that are, I have this great idea, but sometimes they're not always the great, the implementer of the business. So they struggle with how to take that idea or even something that they've heard or seen at a conference, and how do they bring that into the business successfully, training their team, whether it be software or an idea, even a new process. The cool thing is about property management companies, because we're not these large corporations, right? We can actually change things a little bit more on the fly. So, a policy one day may be changed the next day based off of, it didn't work. So it's always kind of keeping up on our toes and changing things. But as you grow as a company in a variety of different ways, your visions do change and the needs change, just like we are finding as we're in this pandemic. This has been a huge change.
Yeah, exactly. And that was really the next thing I was going to ask you is, because of the pandemic, the stakes are higher in really every aspect. So what does that mean? Like, what is all of this change and agility that we're talking about here? What does that mean for property managers now?
It actually, I probably take a different approach. I actually think it's really good. I mean, the pandemic's not good, but the whole idea of us having to refocus our entire outlook of our business and what we're doing and the services we're offering, and both to the client and to the tenant, has changed, and that's actually been really good. So I've really looked at this and kind of coined it as a hard reset for companies.
Yep.
This is an opportunity for you to go, this was kind of put in our face. A lot of times we weren't prepared for this, but how can we overcome the current situation, but then keep that momentum going to continue on to the future? So that hard reset tells us that we need to look at our business differently. We need to really dissect it differently. So I kind of taken some, some EOS tools, some Six Sigma tools, and kind of really focus on defining and analyzing the business in a very different manner, and then helping them structure it, especially if we're working from home, which many of us are now.
Sure.
And it's that whole accountability. So looking at it and really giving your team different accountability than they probably had before when they were working in the office. And how do you track that accountability? How do you make sure that everybody's, now doing that role and that function that they were originally doing, which is different? So it's really kind of looking at that piece of it, and then helping them find the tools, helping these owners find the tools to bring into the business to help them manage that piece and streamline it. There's a lot of cost savings into all of this as well. As the business has changed, our priorities and how we are set up have changed, and how we even show properties has changed. So we may now spend money in a different part of the business, different, my arena now in spending money on leasing is going to be different than it was before. I may not need a physical leasing agent anymore, but I do need the software solution.
Right. And, when you talk about a hard reset, like you mentioned, that is giving them the chance to take a look at their whole business model at a macro level. And so you're getting into some of the ways. And I'm actually curious, when you mentioned Six Sigma, like how you use some of those, how you use that methodology to dig into property management processes.
I kind of do it under the radar, if it would be. So, a lot of people don't know that I'm actually using it, but, I'm defining and I'm measuring the business. I'm looking at the metrics of the business very differently. So how are you today looking at your KPIs? How are you measuring your business? What reports are you using? And then I'm kind of helping them redefine it. And then, look at then bringing in different tools and that technology to kind of do it. And so I'm really building out a roadmap, kind of like a Gantt chart, to help them really look at phases of their business. Because a lot of times people will come to me and say, oh, this just isn't working. And when I start asking questions and diving into their business a little bit more, a lot of times what they see is on the surface, but what I see is underneath.
Sure.
And it's kind of like I always coin it, the Oz behind the curtain. So, I'm looking at it more behind the curtain to see, well, what's really going on? Because what they are seeing is the symptom of really what's the root cause. So I'm looking more into the root cause of it and then fixing that piece. But that may actually be phase 2. So they see a problem, but it may not be the thing that I need to fix first. Right. So I'm looking at really the entire scope of the business. They're looking at this microcosm piece of it, and I'm like looking at the entire thing going, no, we need to look at all of it, because in property management, what people don't realize is there's all of these different, if you think about the life cycle of property management, they all actually are like puzzle pieces. So they do overlap, and I'm looking for those gaps in how that, where that is not overlapping, because they should, because there's those cross-functional responsibilities that happen, those functions that happen. And I need to figure out how to make those puzzle pieces fit again at where they're at right now.
Yeah, definitely opportunities for efficiency for sure. And I know you're busier than ever these days. It really feels like we're all working longer hours because of COVID. But I'm curious how you are really seeing your business and services shift to accommodate PM's most urgent needs.
Well, I think the biggest shift for me has been I usually go on site. So I've actually still had a couple of clients who have asked me to go on site, and if it's safe, I don't mind, and I will go. It's a lot easier if they're working in the office for me to kind of observe, because I really do take some time to observe how that team is functioning together, because that's really important, especially if one person is doing a function and they're yelling across the room to the other person saying, hey, did you get the application, or whatever it is. I'm really observing and absorbing all of that to help me realize where I need to start and what needs to happen. So for me, that's a big change if I'm not going into their office. It does make it a little bit more difficult, but I am still interviewing the team. So I still will hold Zoom meetings with the team independently of the owner of the company, because I need to find out how they are also functioning, a little bit what their mental health state is, because this is important, and how that, how do we need to kind of shift our priorities to, help good employees stay motivated, because everyone gets, especially now, it's been very trying and challenging. And I've noticed that productivity may go down in certain areas, but it's how we can shift that. Right? If you think about it, school's going to be starting soon. And for a lot of people, if they have small children, or even if they have older children who have now had to come back home because maybe college is now online, how are they now functioning with their business, or as an employee, how they're functioning within their role? So the normal 9 to 5 hours may not be agreeable to what they can do, but some things don't require us to necessarily do during the business day. So what can we take and put aside and do differently, and maybe at a later time or at an earlier time? So I have to kind of look at all of that and help them really put that into some sort of a workflow automation tool to help them kind of manage that efficiency a little bit differently.
Yeah, and I love what you said about, really talking and communicating with employees, because at the end of the day, property managers and their staff are really barometers for, like, their pain points are barometers for the process. So,
exactly. And you can't run your company without an employee. I mean, you need your team. So it's without the team involved, and like you said, they're the barometer of the business. We have to make sure that they're on board. So they have to have some buy-in into all of this change. It can't just be the owner saying, yep, we're going to change everything. Because you can do that, and if they don't kind of have that buy-in or accountability piece involved into that, they could care less. So that's why it's really important to kind of bring in the team as we make these changes, because I'm also training the team. I'm not just suggesting the change, saying, oh, well, I think you need to add, this showing software into your whole, into your makeup of what you're doing.
Right.
I have to kind of help them understand how the software works, how does it integrate with the current way that they're doing it, and how we're going to change it. So part of what I'm doing is I'm interviewing them and saying, tell me how you're doing this business today, your functions, what you're doing. So sometimes I'll change even their entire role and say they're not even the right person for that particular role, but they're going to be great over here. And so we've shifted people around. We may have to let people go. It just depends on the needs of that company and where they're at today. Because where they were, just like you said, 6 months ago, is not the same place that they are today. So that's all going to play a factor into how that business is run and who's employed in there.
Right, exactly. And their goals will dictate, like, why they're doing it, like why they're bringing you in, like, and the owner will know that. They'll say, well, yeah, we want to grow, by
so
1% next year. Or
and it's interesting you say that, because sometimes what I find is that the owner, like I said, earlier, the owner says, oh, this is the problem because so-and-so has told me that it's not working. They may not necessarily see it, but they're relying on the employee to say this isn't working. So that's why I have to talk to the employees to say, well, tell me why it's not working. And then it really is this trickle down effect of, it's this, where does it stem from and how is it starting and what is it that we need to tweak? Because it's really kind of, like I said, diving into that root cause of what the issue is and what the owner wants. Sometimes the owner's goals are not the same and they're not aligned with what the company or the employee's goals are. So we really need to get all of that aligned, because we want them to be a part of all of this. And change is healthy. Even before the pandemic, I always say that if you're not changing, you're going to die as a company. You have to continue. The technology is changing. We have to continually stay on top of what's going on just in our industry. And that could be not just technology, it could be your local statutes and ordinances, and how do we accommodate for all of that? Many states are having, and many municipalities are, rental licensing and inspections, and now we have to maybe hire a specific person just for that, depending on where you live. I know, Minneapolis is a very difficult area because, they require a rental license and an inspection every single year. And that's not always standard for every single place, but it's becoming the norm for a lot of states.
Yeah, and you have to adapt to the times. I mean, and another example that we've seen are virtual tours and self showings. And those technologies, of course, are a direct result of COVID-19. And actually, from the leasing demand in 2020 survey that we fielded recently of 1,200 property managers, we found that really 1 in 2 property managers had adopted a virtual tour or self-showing technology. So people
Yeah,
are
and
changing.
well, they are changing, but here's the other piece. There's still a human factor involved in all of that, right?
Oh
You
yeah.
can still bring in the technology, but someone still has to put the lockbox out of the property. That's
Yep.
for the self-showing technology. They have to then remove it when the place is filled. Somebody has to set up the camera to take the 360 video tour. So it's interesting when people say, oh, I just want to implement all of this. You still have to have a piece that can't be 100% automated. This is where I think, that Castle Property Management Group out of Detroit had failed years ago because they wanted to automate every single piece of business with no personal touch. And it just, our industry, you can't do that.
Yeah, it's not that kind of industry. People are at the center of it. We're talking about people's homes.
Exactly. This is an emotional transaction. Buying and selling is an emotional transaction for many people, but so is an owner for what, letting go of this asset that they're trusting you with. I always say that there's 2 important things an owner tends to not, that they entrust others with that are the most valuable, which is your property and their children. So babysitting your children and in a sense, kind of babysitting the property. So these are the 2 most important things. These are emotional transactions to people. And so even if they're an investor, it's still an emotional because it's money. And so that money drives the emotion, especially with the pandemic going on. Emotions are even more heightened. So it's understanding that psychology of what's behind it and what's driving it.
Yeah, 100%. And so we talked about sort of what the different, changes to operations that you've seen so far. And there's been a focus on, of course, process and discipline for PMs because of all of the newfound adoption of technology. Property managers can do things like more virtually, although, of course, with a human element. But there's really a lot of opportunity to be efficient. What areas do you recommend, are you finding that you're recommending for your clients to focus on these days?
Oh, that's kind of a loaded question, I think. I think it depends a lot on the client, the size of the company, and what their needs are. So there's a lot of variables, I think, that come into that. If I were to really say one thing, maintenance is probably the number 1 factor that people go, how am I now going to address maintenance?
Sure.
What automated thing can I bring in? You still have to have somebody kind of, troubleshooting the issue. This is kind of where that emotion comes in for tenants, right? So they are already stressed out about they're at home stuck with kids. They are not working or working now from home, and they have a maintenance issue going on. So what was an emergency before is now even more of an emergency now.
Right.
Because now we're in the home all the time. Before they're out 8 hours, 9 hours a day. So it was an issue maybe during the evening or early morning hours. Yeah, I got to get that fixed. It's really kind of a hassle. Now it's because I'm there all day long and my kids are with me.
The kids are jumping around in the background. You can see the apartment flooding, and they're trying to work at the same time, all in the Zoom meeting. Yeah, I can.
And it's totally understandable. So it's this is kind of why, again, this is that domino effect of that's going on, but you have to take care of your employee who's literally handling these issues every day, all day long. It's very taxing, and your employee also has their own concerns with their own personal life and their own things going on. So it's that whole domino effect of how does it play out. So with maintenance, it's probably the number 1 issue of how do I address that, and how can I, what is an emergency? How do I troubleshoot it? How am I effectively getting somebody out there to do it? Do they have COVID? Do they not? What safety measures do I need to take in? Things like that. So it's all that's probably the number 1 thing. Then it really comes down to, which is kind of a very opposite direction of its marketing. So people are concerned about, well, I still need to grow the business. They can't just because the economy or the whole world is kind of at the standstill of this pandemic, they are still wanting to grow their business and continue that momentum that they had this goal in 2019. They made all these goals for 2020 for their strat plan, and now that came to a halt. But at the same time that they invested or they contracted with a marketing company, let's say, that's not going to change. So how can we keep that momentum going? And so it's looking at their marketing a little bit differently, and how do we restructure it?
Yeah, that's a great point, because any company still has goals. You still want to try and grow your business. And what's interesting about property management is people, of course, still need a place to live. So there is still opportunity in our industry, and we actually found this in the Property Manager's Outlook on Growth report we recently did. 3 out of 4 property managers still anticipated revenue growth, in spite of all of the challenges they're facing with COVID.
Well, and so sometimes I'll tell them it's not so much the focus shouldn't be on the quantity of doors, but necessarily the revenue per door. So what is your profit per door at this point? What was it before, and where is it at now? Because that is going to shift based off of what people can pay, right? Or not pay. So that's going to change. And so it's kind of looking at that bigger picture of their whole growth plan, their goals. Their goals can still be there. I just think we may push their goals out a little bit, or we just restructure their goals, again, dependent on where they're at. Some of my clients are extremely busy. They can't, they're busier. Like you said, they're working longer hours. The business is just coming in, and some aren't as busy. So I do think where you live is a factor. What's going on in that area for, even what the states, are they able to do, what phase are they in, really, right? So are you in phase 2 and phase 3 and phase 4? That actually plays a big factor.
Yeah, of course, because it drives the economy.
Exactly.
I mean, like in Boston right now, they're talking about rolling it back to the prior phase. There's some talk of that happening. If that happens, I'm sure that like rents in Boston will continue to be affected. In Boston proper, I think, as an example, rents have dropped, I think, roughly 6% year over year. And, of course that's due to the pandemic, and it's of course due to the regulations and what we all have to do to get through this. I'm curious too, you mentioned that some of your clients are, really busy, others are not. I wonder if you could share any more specific success stories or hard lessons learned.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest success stories I have is actually helping, and I've done this with a few clients, is helping really their bottom line, that number, come into the triple digits. And really, I kind of go back to maintenance. I actually really love maintenance. I think maintenance is essential to our business, and it's how we approach it. A lot of companies don't want to tackle it. It's very difficult, and you have to kind of know some, there's different nuances with maintenance. Some are just doing it more as a triage and, reactive. But I feel like if you could be a little bit more proactive, there's a lot of money to be made just on the maintenance side of it. It's a lot of work, and it's about educating the owner, our client, if you're the property management company, on why we're charging for maintenance, and why it's different than literally just managing your property. Owners will seem to think that, well, wouldn't that just be included because you're managing my property? But it's helping property management companies actually it's really building out. So I like to build out a spreadsheet catered to each property management company, and helping them with their KPIs and helping them understand their actual numbers, pulling numbers in from their property management software, and then putting it into the spreadsheet to really say, well, this is actually how much you're really making, and this is how much that door is costing you with all of the maintenance. And when they kind of see that, and then I tell them, oh, and you've employed somebody, by the way, to manage all of this, but yet you're not charging for it, but you have an additional head count.
Right, so that doesn't really make business sense, does it?
Exactly, but I'm helping them look at it going, well, yeah, but I figured I just had to do that. I always say, when somebody moves into a property, you've got that life cycle of property management, right? You've got the onboarding, the marketing of the property, I'm showing the property, I've done the application process, then I'm moving them in. Well, what happens after you move a tenant in before they move out? 2 things: rent and maintenance. That's really it. So, I mean, there's other little things, right, that may happen, but those might fall under accounting. Some may happen under that property management umbrella to
Sure.
say, well, it was a roommate issue or a violation. Those are really few and far between. What happens consistently every month is rent is paid, hopefully, right? And maintenance is pretty much an issue with any property. And it could be minor or it could be major. So if you're having to employ somebody or you're having to literally put that onto an existing property manager's role, you know, then we have to look at your door count per that property manager. We have to kind of, what are their entire functions? How are you making money on all facets of the buckets of property management, maintenance being one of them? So it's helping my clients look at that differently and actually adding more dollars to their bottom line. That's probably been my biggest success in helping them reevaluate their revenue streams and how they can comfortably talk about their services without kind of feeling sick to the stomach to say, or cringe, you know, when you have to say, here's my fees and I'm sorry, here's my fees. You know, you don't want them to apologize for their fees. You want them to say, these are my fees and this is why.
Yeah, be confident about it. That's how you sell it, right?
Exactly. And you're not even selling it. I don't actually like to coin it that I'm selling my services. I like to say I'm educating you on what our services are, because then
I like
it's
that better.
naturally sold. What?
I said I like that better. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, now it doesn't feel like nobody likes to go to the car sales place, right? Because we know we're getting sold add-ons. We don't want that. Instead, I just want you to tell me all the good features about the car, and I might be like, I just want the car. This is great.
Right, exactly. And you're really trying to you're trying to train or help your clients really be advocates for their customers and their clients and be advisors to an extent, because they're really caring for one of the most important things of the livelihood of their clients, which is, their investments a lot of the time.
Yeah, exactly. And part of it also is then helping them dive into their contracts that they have. I'll review their current management contract, see what could be missing, what can we do based on the laws of your state, and how, what are your competitors doing? What differentiates you from everyone else? What makes, because everybody's different in how there's no right or wrong way in property management. I think there's just different ways, but it all goes down to the culture of who is owning that company. Because you may have somebody who's like, I don't really want to grow to 200 or 300 doors. I just want to offer a really good customer service. Well, what does that mean? Or my niche is high end only and luxury rentals. Well, that's going to be very, very different from somebody who's just doing, a $1,400 a month rental. Sure. So it's really, it has to go with what their focus is for that business as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, obviously we're going through, COVID still, and it's still a huge concern for the whole world, really. What do you think, what opportunities and risks do you think still exist for property management companies? Because we're kind of at a crossroads right now where there's a lot of uncertainty.
Well, I think that's a really good question, because I think there's still a lot of opportunity. First off, there's a lot of people who need jobs. So the opportunity is train your employees, make sure you have good employees, because if they're not working and it's not a good fit, there are other people who will be a good fit. So there's more opportunity for hiring really good people. The risk is that you don't do that and you become complacent and you don't change at all. And, or you kind of throw your hands up and go, I just don't know what to do. I can't invest in my business. So, when people say, well, I can't afford to hire somebody to help me, consult through my business, then they may not be invested into making their business better and getting to that next level. Because it's hard to do on your own. You only know as much as you know. And sometimes it's important if you really have this goal to get to that next level and you can't really manage your time well enough to get there, find somebody to help you do that.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of looking at it. I mean, and really what the core of what you're saying, I think, has to do a lot with the culture that, a property management company is trying to create for their employees. Like, you want to have a great team that cares about each other, that works hard, and that it's an attractive place to work. And
Yeah.
I think you do that first, and you mentioned communication initially with the staff, and I think that rings true, especially here, just because you have to learn all of those things in your
Yeah.
company.
And that's probably another risk I see, especially with everybody kind of remote working. Your communication does go down, and people are kind of left to their own devices on really running their area. And if you don't have the guidance and that structure in place, it's going to fail, unfortunately. You just won't grow. You may just remain stagnant. You may continue to struggle in certain areas and not know why.
Yeah.
And it's also, when do you pull everybody back in to an office setting maybe, or when, because people are going to get complacent with also working from home. And some team members don't want to do that because, again, it's too distracting. They want to get back into an office. So you have to kind of be on top of what's going on in your state, in your area, your community, and how can you safely bring people back into the office to work more efficiently.
Yeah, and it's about the touch points as well. Like when you're in the office, you decide to have a meeting, right? And you call everybody together if it's worthwhile
Yes.
having. We've heard
And
from a
that's
lot of property managers, just having those touch points, even virtually,
mm-hmm.
and having like
Right.
special types of meetings where people they do something a little bit differently to communicate. I think like that's a muscle. Like that communication is not always necessarily done right in the office at all times, but it's
Yeah.
always effort, right? And as a leader or as an owner, a business owner, you really have to exercise that muscle all the time with your team and
Yeah.
keep them talking.
Well, and that's a really good point, because I've seen that happen as well. People neglect meetings. They were having them, maybe not. And
Right.
then they neglect them. And now it's no longer an appointment on the calendar anymore, right? It's no longer blocked off to say we need to, and it could be a Zoom meeting. It could be a park where you socially distance, or however, you make sure it's safe to kind of get them out of their own environment as well. But yeah, mix it up a little bit. Try to do, be creative in what we're doing, and make your staff feel like you are invested in them, because again, you need them.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And so the last question I had for you is really, how do you see technology like property management software or what have you helping your clients to adapt and become more efficient in this time? And so how do you see it continuing to evolve?
Well, I think what I have found and what I've seen is, well, one, it's essential. I think they all know that it's essential. They have to have it. But there's two parts to that. So a lot of clients before and even now still weren't or are not using their software to the what it can do, right? To its fullest capacity. They were using segments of it, or we just kind of log in and we're just looking at who's living there, or they're not using all of the data fields the way they should. So that's one step I try to fix right away. Sure. Is to make, because I'm really big on reports, and reports are only good if the data is good. So the data points are essential. And so I help them understand their software better. So that's one piece. The second piece is I also see the software companies, because of where we're at now, improving their software. Now they're spending a little bit more in development dollars to actually get things done in a more efficient way, because the rules have changed, right? The rules of property management have changed. So they have to now kind of change with it and change some of their features. So there's been I'm very privy to kind of all of the software, and I see a lot of feature changes coming out with everyone, and more than there has been in the past. I think they've all kind of sped up their whole development on rolling things out. They haven't had things, hold them back as they did before. They're able to kind of do things faster. Well, that means on the user end, we have to keep up with that. And how do we maximize our software usage and what we're using? So, back in the day when we all went to conferences, if we can all remember when that was, we would go to these trade shows and we'd be like all starry-eyed and, oh, this looks like a great, thing I could integrate in my business. And they signed up and then they don't use it, or they don't know how to use it. And so it's kind of figuring out, was that the right piece to bring in, and how do we train you guys to use it and be more efficient?
Right, exactly. And that's I think a crucial piece of the kind of software that we're talking about here, and the kind of platforms that, I know at Buildium, we love to support the property management industry with is it's always iterating. We're always trying to make it better. And with those, with those iterations comes opportunity and change to use the product even better. And that's exactly why we have, a whole part of our content that we put out into the world is called Buildium Academy, and it really helps to train property managers on the Buildium products. So very important to us for sure.
No, and it is really important. But what I help clients do is take that information, whether it be from Buildium Academy or anyone else, is that you take that and then how does that apply to your business? Because remember, their operations are going to be very different than somebody else's. So it's taking that information and then really integrating that into the structure of their business.
Last question. How do property managers get a hold of you, Deb, if they want to talk to you about their business?
Great question. They can reach me. I have a website. It's realtimeconsultingservices.com. That's kind of long and hard to remember sometimes. So it could be wefixyourbiz.com, B-I-Z, wefixyourbiz.com. And they can find me there. They can fill out a form, kind of let me know what they, what they are struggling with. They can chat with me on the website. I consult with everyone the first time for free. I want to, kind of get to know a little bit about what they feel that their struggles are, what's going on, what their needs are for the business. I put together a proposal of what I, from our initial findings and kind of get that back to them. So, and everybody's, like I said, everybody's different. The length of time may be different that we're working together. And so that's all going to play a factor into it. But yeah, great question. Thank you.
Thanks so much for talking with me today, Deb. We've really learned a lot of great things, and it's awesome to see that there's someone out there that's supporting property management businesses through these crazy uncertain times. Because although a lot of things have changed, there are challenges. There's also a lot of opportunity, and I know that we'll be here continuing to communicate with property managers, and I know you will be too. So with that said, hope everybody enjoyed it. Again, the two reports that I was referring to. Links are in the descriptions below. And if you have any comments, definitely feel free to share. Talk to you next time.